Starting today, my sister and her husband are moving in with us. Strangers should just go somewhere else. Suddenly, John and my sister-in-law's husband barged into our house and said, "Why do I have to leave this house? Because we can no longer live together as a married couple?" John claimed that I had been treating him like a maid all this time. In other words, "I've been a victim of your emotional abuse." "That's terrible, John," my sister-in-law exaggeratedly said, pretending to wipe away non-existent tears. "But I can't stand it anymore. I'm divorcing you. I'll be getting the property division first, this house. I endured that life for 2 years, so I have the right to it, don't I?" That's right. Who's going to pay the $3,300 living expenses? The next day, when I moved into a luxury facility worth $2 million, I got a barrage of calls from my hysterical husband and his sister. My name is Anna Smith, and I just turned 40 a little while ago. I'm a day trader and investor. I buy and sell currencies and stocks. Thanks to that, my job is going well, and I can say I have a decent amount of wealth. I have a congenital illness, which isn't particularly life-threatening, but the doctors advise me not to overdo it and not to have children if possible. Apparently, there's a significant risk associated with childbirth. My parents didn't hide this from me. They raised me to face my illness from a young age and to live my life with determination. My father, who worked at a brokerage firm, taught me about stocks, and thanks to him, I can now make a living from it. My husband's name is John. He's 30 years old, 10 years younger than me, and we've been married for 2 years. We met when John started working as a waiter at my favorite restaurant. I thought a cute guy had joined, but we were just staff and customer. That was it. But somehow, he got to me, and we went from friends to lovers, and before I knew it, we were thinking about marriage. I thought this couldn't go on. After all, I can't have children. John is still in his 20s. I couldn't marry him and make him give up the possibility of having his own children. So, I refused his proposal once. But then John said to me, "I want to live my life with you, Anna. That's why I proposed. If I wanted kids, I would have chosen someone else from the start. Don't you trust me?" I was so happy I cried and decided to accept his proposal. Right after we got married, John said, "I'll stay at home and take care of everything. I don't hate my job as a waiter, but wouldn't it be easier for you to work this way? You know I'm good at cooking." John is indeed good at cooking. He originally had an interest in food and got a job related to it. He wasn't in the kitchen, but he said he learned a lot by watching. That's how we first started talking. My brother works in the restaurant industry and told me he opened his own place, which piqued John's interest, and we had many conversations. At that time, John said he wanted to have his own place someday, so he asked me to share more stories, his eyes sparkling. Seeing those eyes, I thought it was nice. But when he said he'd be a stay-at-home husband, I asked what would happen to his dream. He replied, "Do you think being a stay-at-home husband means I can't have my own place? That's disrespectful to people who do housework full-time. That's old-fashioned thinking. Besides, wouldn't it be lonely if we were apart? I want to spend as much time with you as possible." When he said that so sweetly, I, being weak, agreed to his proposal. At first, things went really well with me working and John handling all the housework. But gradually, John stopped doing the chores. The living room, which once had that newlywed vibe, started getting cluttered with comic books and video games, and John began spending all night playing games in front of the big TV. At first, it was just occasionally, so I thought it was okay once in a while. But it got worse and worse, and soon he was living a completely reversed, day-night schedule. John, isn't this getting a bit out of hand lately? Yeah, sorry. I'm really into this game right now. Can you let it slide until I finish it, please? He pleaded. I reluctantly agreed to let him finish that game, but before I knew it, he was hooked on a new game. The house was a mess. When we first got married, John used to clean meticulously, keeping the place comfortable. He was such a great stay-at-home husband. What happened? I put up with it for a few months, but one day I finally had to say something. John, we need to talk. Huh, what about? I married an adult man, but now it felt like dealing with an elementary school kid. It felt like I was a mom scolding her child to do their homework before playing games. We're supposed to be a married couple, equals. You're the one who wanted to be a stay-at-home husband, so I need you to keep that promise. I'm not saying you can't have fun, just finish your responsibilities first. I laid it all out, and John thought for a moment before saying, Got it. I'm sorry I've been slacking. I'll play only after I finish my chores, I promise. True to his word, John went back to being the perfect stay-at-home husband, but there was a difference this time. He always seemed unhappy. In the beginning, he used to cook joyfully and proudly show off the clean house. Now he just rushed through his tasks and retreated to his room. He used to play games on the big living room TV and read comics on the sofa. But now he played online games in his own room, more and more. He started saying things like, Sorry, I have a dungeon raid tonight. Can you eat by yourself? Just leave the dishes, I'll wash them later. I would watch him walk away to his room and eat dinner alone. No matter how good the food was, eating it alone like that made it taste less enjoyable. But since he was doing the housework as promised, I couldn't say anything. And it wasn't just dinner. I have a guild battle tonight. Not sure when I'll be back. Go to bed without me. He wouldn't come back to the bedroom. It was like this almost every night. During the day, he'd go out alone. When I asked where he was going, he'd just say, shopping, and then not return until evening. Yet, he always made sure to prepare my meals and leave them ready. It felt like sarcasm. He did all the chores, cleaning, laundry, cooking. So, I couldn't complain, but this wasn't family life. It felt like having a live-in housekeeper. We barely spoke anymore. I just ate the prepared and cold meals alone, changed into the washed clothes, and sat in the cleaned house feeling lonely. In times like these, I thought being alone might be less lonely. Thinking this, I'd look at John's room door and cry from the sadness. Still, I kept hoping things would settle down. I believed we'd get back to normal eventually, so I silently endured. Then, after about a year of this lifestyle, John suddenly made an announcement. Starting today, my sister and her husband are moving in with us. Strangers should just go somewhere else. Suddenly, John and my sister-in-law's husband barged into our house and said that. I couldn't understand it at all. I remembered hearing that when John got married and moved in here, his sister and her husband moved into an apartment. What, John? You're moving out and going back to the old apartment? In my confusion, I blurted that out, and the three of them looked at each other and burst out laughing. No, I'm staying here with my sister and her husband. You're the one who's moving out. I couldn't understand it at all. Why do I have to leave this house? Because we can no longer live together as a married couple, John claimed. You have been treating me like a maid all this time. In other words, I've been a victim of your emotional abuse. That's terrible, John, my sister-in-law exaggeratedly said, pretending to wipe away non-existent tears. But I can't stand it anymore. I'm divorcing you. I'll be getting property division first. This house. I endured that life for 2 years, so I have the right to it, don't I? That's right, John kept asserting, and his sister kept cheering him on. Meanwhile, her husband just stood there smirking at them. I started to understand what was going on. John must have planned this from the beginning. He sweet-talked me into marrying him and planned to divorce me at a convenient time. Just like he said earlier, he planned to get his hands on various things. I never planned on getting married. Knowing I couldn't have children and not being particularly attractive, my personality is just so-so. I didn't think any man would want to marry me. So, I decided to live alone, focusing on my work and hobbies. I had some friends and a normal relationship with my parents and brother. My parents moved to my dad's hometown after he retired, living there with my brother and his wife. My brother worked in the restaurant industry for a few. Starting today, my sister and her husband are moving in with us. Strangers should just go somewhere else. Suddenly, John and my sister-in-law's husband barged into our house and said, "Why do I have to leave this house? Because we can no longer live together as a married couple?" John claimed that I had been treating him like a maid all this time. In other words, I've been a victim of your emotional abuse. That's terrible, John, my sister-in-law exaggeratedly said, pretending to wipe away non-existent tears. But I can't stand it anymore. I'm divorcing you. I'll be getting the property division first, this house. I endured that life for 2 years, so I have the right to it, don't I? That's right. Who's going to pay the $3,300 living expenses? The next day, when I moved into a luxury facility worth $2 million, I got a barrage of calls from my hysterical husband and his sister. My name is Anna Smith, and I just turned 40 a little while ago. I'm a day trader and investor. I buy and sell currencies and stocks. Thanks to that, my job is going well, and I can say I have a decent amount of wealth. I have a congenital illness, which isn't particularly life-threatening, but the doctors advise me not to overdo it and not to have children if possible. Apparently, there's a significant risk associated with childbirth. My parents didn't hide this from me. They raised me to face my illness from a young age and to live my life with determination. My father, who worked at a brokerage firm, taught me about stocks, and thanks to him, I can now make a living from it. My husband's name is John. He's 30 years old, 10 years younger than me, and we've been married for 2 years. We met when John started working as a waiter at my favorite restaurant. I thought a cute guy had joined, but we were just staff and customer. That was it. But somehow, he got to me, and we went from friends to lovers. And before I knew it, we were thinking about marriage. I thought this couldn't go on. After all, I can't have children. John is still in his 20s. I couldn't marry him and make him give up the possibility of having his own children. So, I refused his proposal once. But then John said to me, "I want to live my life with you, Anna. That's why I proposed. If I wanted kids, I would have chosen someone else from the start. Don't you trust me?" I was so happy I cried and decided to accept his proposal. Right after we got married, John said, "I'll stay at home and take care of everything. I don't hate my job as a waiter, but wouldn't it be easier for you to work this way? You know I'm good at cooking." John is indeed good at cooking. He originally had an interest in food and got a job related to it. He wasn't in the kitchen, but he said he learned a lot by watching. That's how we first started talking. My brother works in the restaurant industry and told me he opened his own place, which piqued John's interest, and we had many conversations. At that time, John said he wanted to have his own place someday, so he asked me to share more stories. His eyes sparkling. Seeing those eyes, I thought it was nice. But when he said he'd be a stay-at-home husband, I asked what would happen to his dream. He replied, "Do you think being a stay-at-home husband means I can't have my own place? That's disrespectful to people who do housework full-time. That's old-fashioned thinking. Besides, wouldn't it be lonely if we were apart? I want to spend as much time with you as possible." When he said that so sweetly, I, being weak, agreed to his proposal. At first, things went really well with me working and John handling all the housework. But gradually, John stopped doing the chores. The living room, which once had that newlywed vibe, started getting cluttered with comic books and video games, and John began spending all night playing games in front of the big TV. At first, it was just occasionally, so I thought it was okay once in a while. But it got worse and worse, and soon he was living a completely reversed day-night schedule. "John, isn't this getting a bit out of hand lately?" "Yeah, sorry. I'm really into this game right now. Can you let it slide until I finish it, please?" he pleaded. I reluctantly agreed to let him finish that game, but before I knew it, he was hooked on a new game. The house was a mess. When we first got married, John used to clean meticulously, keeping the place comfortable. He was such a great stay-at-home husband. What happened? I put up with it for a few months, but one day I finally had to say something. "John, we need to talk." "Huh, what about?" "I married an adult man, but now it felt like dealing with an elementary school kid. It felt like I was a mom scolding her child to do their homework before playing games. We're supposed to be a married couple, equals. You're the one who wanted to be a stay-at-home husband, so I need you to keep that promise. I'm not saying you can't have fun, just finish your responsibilities first." I laid it all out, and John thought for a moment before saying, "Got it. I'm sorry I've been slacking. I'll play only after I finish my chores, I promise." True to his word, John went back to being the perfect stay-at-home husband, but there was a difference this time. He always seemed unhappy. In the beginning, he used to cook joyfully and proudly show off the clean house. Now he just rushed through his tasks and retreated to his room. He used to play games on the big living room TV and read comics on the sofa. But now he played online games in his own room, more and more. He started saying things like, "Sorry, I have a dungeon raid tonight. Can you eat by yourself? Just leave the dishes, I'll wash them later." I would watch him walk away to his room and eat dinner alone. No matter how good the food was, eating it alone like that made it taste less enjoyable. But since he was doing the housework as promised, I couldn't say anything. And it wasn't just dinner. "I have a guild battle tonight. Not sure when I'll be back. Go to bed without me." He wouldn't come back to the bedroom. It was like this almost every night. During the day, he'd go out alone. When I asked where he was going, he'd just say, "Shopping," and then not return until evening. Yet, he always made sure to prepare my meals and leave them ready. It felt like sarcasm. He did all the chores, cleaning, laundry, cooking. So I couldn't complain, but this wasn't family life. It felt like having a live-in housekeeper. We barely spoke anymore. I just ate the prepared and cold meals alone, changed into the washed clothes, and sat in the cleaned house feeling lonely. In times like these, I thought being alone might be less lonely. Thinking this, I'd look at John's room door and cry from the sadness. Still, I kept hoping things would settle down. I believed we'd get back to normal eventually, so I silently endured. Then, after about a year of this lifestyle, John suddenly made an announcement. "Starting today, my sister and her husband are moving in with us. Strangers should just go somewhere else." Suddenly, John and my sister-in-law's husband barged into our house and said that. I couldn't understand it at all. I remembered hearing that when John got married and moved in here, his sister and her husband moved into an apartment. What, John? You're moving out and going back to the old apartment? In my confusion, I blurted that out, and the three of them looked at each other and burst out laughing. No, I'm staying here with my sister and her husband. You're the one who's moving out. I couldn't understand it at all. Why do I have to leave this house? Because we can no longer live together as a married couple, John claimed. You have been treating me like a maid all this time. In other words, I've been a victim of your emotional abuse. That's terrible, John, my sister-in-law exaggeratedly said, pretending to wipe away non-existent tears. But I can't stand it anymore. I'm divorcing you. I'll be getting property division first, this house. I endured that life for 2 years, so I have the right to it, don't I? That's right, John kept asserting, and his sister kept cheering him on. Meanwhile, her husband just stood there smirking at them. I started to understand what was going on. John must have planned this from the beginning. He sweet-talked me into marrying him and planned to divorce me at a convenient time. Just like he said earlier, he planned to get his hands on various things. I never planned on getting married. Knowing I couldn't have children and not being particularly attractive, my personality is just so-so. I didn't think any man would want to marry me. So, I decided to live alone, focusing on my work and hobbies. I had some friends and a normal relationship with my parents and brother. My parents moved to my dad's hometown after he retired, living there with my brother and his wife. My brother worked in the restaurant industry for a few years, got married, and started a small restaurant with his wife. When choosing the location, he decided to live with our parents. The land is spacious, so they built a separate house on the property and lived together on the same premises. I was born and raised in this town close to the city, so it's not exactly like visiting home when I go there. But I enjoyed spending time with my parents, brother, sister-in-law, and my 2 nephews. I never felt lonely, so getting married to a man 10 years younger was a surprise even to me. In hindsight, I guess I was played. Listening to John and his sister, I couldn't help but laugh at my own foolishness. I had a feeling this might happen. John approached me so suddenly and got so deeply involved. It felt like a made-up story. At first, I was cautious, but his puppy-like affection won me over. I started thinking quickly. How can I turn the tables? How can I give these people a taste of their own medicine? As a day trader, my job is to read situations, anticipate the future, and turn things in a positive direction. I've been winning my whole life, so I can handle this too. No, I'll definitely handle it. As I kept my head down, John and his sister kept hurling insults at me. Hey, why are you so quiet? Hurry up and pack your things. Get ready to leave. For now, I'll act like I'm leaving the house. All right, I'll leave. I started packing only my personal belongings. All I needed was a change of clothes, my laptop for work, and a few other small items. Here, fill this out. John handed me a piece of paper. It was the divorce papers I'd heard about. The witness section had his sister's and her husband's names already filled in. I'll file the divorce papers. I'll contact you if I need anything else. With mocking smiles, John and the others watched as I left my own condo with my belongings. I had a place to go for now. I'll head there and think things over. I'm sure they'll have more to say soon enough, so I'll deal with it then. I drove out of the condo's parking lot and headed to my destination. Once I got there, I had a peaceful night's sleep and felt refreshed. I woke up later than usual and had brunch. The food here is always delicious. It was the first time I'd been here since getting married, so it had been over 2 years. First, I sent John a message on WhatsApp telling him my current location and that my lawyer would handle things from now on. The phone rang almost immediately, faster than I expected. What the hell is this about? I could hear John's sister yelling in the background, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. What do you mean? Don't play dumb. Where the hell are you? John reacted furiously. I came here because I was kicked out. Is that a problem? That's not what I mean. John's voice was filled with frustration. That's a high-end resort, a members-only hotel. Why are you there? Because I'm a member here. You never told me that. Of course not, because I never mentioned it. As John said, this is a very exclusive hotel, but it's not just a hotel. It's a luxury resort with lifetime care services. In other words, a high-end retirement facility. There's even a hospital next door. You can stay here as a resort guest or buy a place and live here like a regular home. Getting in requires at least $2 million, and it was quite the topic in the media for a while. That's probably why John recognized the name and called me immediately after checking. Why are you a member of a place like that? Because I paid for the rights to be here. On the other end of the line, Jayen made some incomprehensible noises. Someone mentioned I should go somewhere else, right? So I decided to live here. If you want to stay in the house, go ahead. Just make sure to pay the $3,300 monthly rent. What? But that's your house. What do you mean rent? I decided to sell it. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I won't be living there anymore. I never planned on getting married and bought this place to avoid burdening anyone in my old age. I had already purchased the condo I lived in until yesterday, but I knew I had to secure this spot quickly, as such prime facilities don't come up for sale often. I took the plunge. I plan to move in here when I am older. This place is a bit far from the city, so it felt too early to retire here completely while I could still work. I kept it as a vacation home. I visited occasionally to unwind, but kept it a secret from everyone. The only people who know are my accountant and lawyer. Give me that place, too. While I was deep in thought, Jayen suddenly said that I should be able to get half of that. How convenient for him. Who in their right mind?
The conference room buzzed with chatter as I glanced at my phone, its screen lighting up with an incoming call from Tyler. I stepped out into the hallway, expecting the usual small talk. How's the trip? When will you be home? Instead, Tyler's voice came through cold and smug. I'm divorcing you, he said, his tone almost triumphant. I've already sold the apartment, so you'll need to figure out where you're going to live. Enjoy that. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The audacity of it, the complete lack of remorse, it was almost laughable. My hand tightened around the phone as his words sunk in. You sold the apartment? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Yeah, he said with a dry laugh. Nicole and I need the money to set up our life together. She deserves better than a tiny place like that anyway. Nicole. The name stung, though I'd suspected for months that there was someone else. Tyler's late nights, his sudden work trips, and the mounting distance between us all pointed to a third party. But to hear him speak her name so casually, as if I were the intruder in their life, lit a fire in my chest. Sounds good, I replied evenly. There was no way I was giving him the satisfaction of hearing me crack. My name is Amelia, and up until that phone call, I thought I'd married a man I could trust. Tyler and I had been together for 6 years, and while things hadn't always been perfect, I'd believed in our partnership. We'd worked hard to buy our apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom in the city that I'd fallen in love with the moment I saw it. It wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of everything we'd built together. Or at least that's what I'd thought. Looking back, there had been signs, small cracks in the foundation I'd ignored. Tyler's dismissive attitude whenever I asked about finances, his tendency to brush off my concerns with a charming smile and a quick kiss. I'd always assumed his confidence came from knowing what he was doing. Now I realized it came from knowing he could manipulate me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I sat through client meetings, nodding at all the right moments while my mind raced. Tyler thought he'd won. He thought he could pull the rug out from under me, sell the home I'd worked so hard for, and walk away scot-free. But there was one crucial detail he didn't know. The apartment deed had been in my name alone for months. I'd had it transferred after we refinanced earlier in the year, a move Tyler had agreed to without much thought because it meant a lower interest rate. He'd never bothered to ask about the details or read the paperwork he'd signed. His carelessness was going to be his undoing. By the time I returned to my hotel room that evening, my shock had turned into resolve. I wasn't going to cry or beg. Tyler wanted a fight? Fine. But this was a fight I was going to win. The first call I made was to Chloe, my lawyer and longtime friend. I laid out the situation in painstaking detail, my voice calm even as my pulse raced. "He sold the apartment?" she repeated, incredulous. "Does he even realize that he can't do that without your consent?" "Apparently not," I said, a hint of amusement creeping into my tone. "He thinks he's already spent the money on his new life with Nicole." Chloe laughed dryly. "Well, he's in for a rude awakening. The sale is invalid. You can prove sole ownership, and if he's taken any money from the buyer, he's on the hook for fraud." The word fraud sent a jolt of satisfaction through me. "What do we need to do?" I asked. "First, we'll notify the buyer that the sale isn't legal," Chloe said. "Then, we'll draft a formal letter for Tyler, outlining the consequences of his actions. If he's dumb enough to try anything else, we'll take him to court." As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Tyler thought he'd outsmarted me, that he'd left me powerless and scrambling. But in reality, he'd just set himself up for the ultimate humiliation. I spent the rest of the trip focusing on my work, compartmentalizing my emotions and channeling my energy into the task ahead. The betrayal hurt, but the prospect of reclaiming my life and watching Tyler's smugness crumble gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. When I boarded the plane home, I was ready to face Tyler, ready to dismantle his lies, and ready to start a new chapter without him. This wasn't just about winning. It was about taking back control. The flight home gave me hours to think about how everything had unraveled. Tyler's arrogance was astounding. He hadn't even tried to hide his betrayal, as if I was just another obstacle to bulldoze on his path to freedom. But instead of spiraling into anger, I focused on what I'd do when I returned. Tyler thought I was powerless, but he didn't realize I'd been playing the long game without even knowing it. As the plane touched down, my first call was to Chloe. "I'm back," I said as I hauled my suitcase off the luggage carousel. "What's the next step?" "We've already notified the buyer," she replied, her tone brisk and efficient. They were shocked, to say the least, and not too happy with Tyler. They're willing to cooperate, which helps our case. "And Tyler?" I asked. "I sent the formal letter to his email this morning," she said. "It outlines the illegality of the sale, your sole ownership of the apartment, and the potential consequences of fraud. He hasn't responded yet, but if I had to guess, he's going to be furious." Good, I thought. Let him stew. When I arrived home, the apartment was eerily quiet. Tyler's things were still there, his jackets draped over the chair, his shoes carelessly tossed by the door, but the place felt different, like the energy had shifted. I took a deep breath and set my suitcase down, knowing that the confrontation would come soon enough. Sure enough, Tyler came storming in that evening, his face red with anger and his phone clutched in his hand. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the letter Chloe had sent. "You're telling me I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine." "No, Tyler," I said calmly, crossing my arms. "It's not. The deed has been in my name for months. You can't sell something you don't own. He froze, his face a mixture of confusion and rage. What are you talking about? I grabbed the deed from the file I'd pulled earlier, holding it up for him to see. After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred to my name. You signed off on it, remember? Or did you just skim the paperwork like you always do? For a moment, he said nothing. Then his expression twisted into a sneer. You think you're so smart, don't you? This doesn't change anything. I already made a deal, and you're going to look like a fool when it all falls apart. I stared at him, unblinking. The sale is already void, Tyler. The buyer knows it, and they're ready to take legal action if you don't return the money. Oh, and speaking of money, I took a step closer, lowering my voice. If you've spent a single cent of that deposit, you're in even bigger trouble. Tyler's confidence wavered for the first time. You don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, my voice steady. You've spent years treating me like I'm too naive to notice what you're doing. But guess what, Tyler? I've been paying attention, and now you're going to deal with the consequences. He started pacing, his frustration mounting. This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You can't just kick me out of here? I raised an eyebrow. Actually, I can. This apartment is legally mine. You can stay here for now, but only because I'm giving you the courtesy of time to figure out your next move. But let me be clear, I'm not going anywhere. Over the next few days, Tyler's anger turned into desperation. He called me repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails that alternated between begging and threatening. Meanwhile, Chloe worked behind the scenes to ensure that every loose end was tied up. The buyer rescinded the agreement, furious at Tyler for wasting their time and money, and Chloe drafted the preliminary paperwork for the divorce proceedings. You're in a good position, Amelia, she told me during one of our meetings. Tyler has no leverage here. Between the voided sale and the fraud charges hanging over his head, he'll have to cooperate if he wants to avoid a bigger mess. Her words were a relief, but they also reminded me just how much I'd allowed Tyler to control my life. For years, I'd ignored his dismissiveness and arrogance, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But now, I saw how much I'd been giving up, and I was determined to take it all back. Lauren, my best friend, came over one evening to help me reorganize the apartment. We boxed up Tyler's things, carefully stacking them in the corner of the living room. How's he taking all this? She asked, holding up one of his gaudy ties with a smirk. Not well, I said, laughing despite myself. He's still convinced he can talk his way out of it, but I'm not budging. Good, she said, tossing the tie into the box. He doesn't deserve a single inch of your space or your time. I nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude for her support. For so long, I'd felt alone in my marriage, carrying the emotional and financial burden while Tyler took credit for everything. But now, I had people in my corner, and that made all the difference. The final piece of my plan fell into place the day Tyler brought Nicole to the apartment. I was sitting at the dining table reviewing some paperwork when they walked in like they owned the place. Nicole looked around with a smug smile, her arm looped through Tyler's. So, this is where we're staying? She said, her voice dripping with entitlement. I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. No, I said firmly. This is where Tyler was staying. You, Nicole, won't be staying here at all. Her smile faltered and she glanced at Tyler, who looked equally stunned. What is this? He demanded. This, I said, gesturing to the apartment around me, is my home. Not yours, not hers, and certainly not a hotel for you to shack up in after stabbing me in the back. Nicole's expression turned icy, but she said nothing. Tyler, on the other hand, looked like he was about to explode. You can't do this, he shouted. You're being unreasonable. I met his gaze, unflinching. No, Tyler. What's unreasonable is thinking you could sell my home, walk away with the money, and expect me to just roll over. You're lucky I haven't filed criminal charges for now. Tyler stood in the doorway, his face red with frustration, while Nicole crossed her arms, looking increasingly uncomfortable. You're being ridiculous, Amelia, he said, his voice laced with desperation. You can't just kick me out of my own home. I took a step forward, my voice calm but unwavering. This is my home, Tyler. The deed has been in my name for months, and you know that. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, just like you always do. So no, this isn't your home anymore. Nicole glanced at Tyler, her perfectly manicured hand tightening around her purse strap. Wait, what's she talking about? She asked, her tone sharp. You said this was your apartment, that you sold it. He flinched, trying to wave her off. It's complicated. I'll handle it. Oh, it's not complicated, I said, stepping closer. You tried to sell an apartment that doesn't belong to you. That sale is void, Tyler. And as of right now, you don't have a leg to stand on. Nicole's composure cracked. You mean the money you told me you had? She stopped mid-sentence, her voice rising. Oh my God, did you lie about that too? Nicole, let me explain, Tyler said quickly, holding his hands up. But she wasn't having it. No, I said, cutting him off. Let me explain. Tyler tried to sell the apartment behind my back, thinking he could pocket the money and leave me with nothing. What he didn't know is that I had the deed transferred to my name months ago. So not only did he fail to sell it, but he also committed fraud by pretending he could. Nicole's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Fraud, she whispered, taking a step away from him. Are you serious? Yes, fraud, I said, crossing my arms, and I'm prepared to press charges if he doesn't get his things and leave by the end of the day. Tyler's facade finally cracked. You can't do this, Amelia, he said, his voice pleading now. We've been together for 6 years. You can't just throw me out. You threw me out the moment you made that phone call, I said, my voice hardening. You told me you were divorcing me and laughed about me having to find a new place to live. You didn't just betray me, Tyler. You tried to ruin me. So don't stand there and act like you're the victim. Nicole took another step back, her eyes darting between us. This is insane, she muttered, clutching her purse tighter. You didn't tell me any of this, Tyler. You said you had everything handled. He turned to her, desperation written all over his face. Nicole, I can fix this. I just need... She cut him off with a raised hand. Don't, just don't. I'm not getting dragged into your mess. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving him standing there, stunned. I couldn't help but smile as the door clicked shut behind her. Looks like you're on your own, I said, turning back to Tyler. Now, let's talk about what happens next. He slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Amelia, please. I screwed up. I know that. But you don't have to do this. You're right, I said, grabbing a folder from the kitchen counter and setting it on the coffee table in front of him. I don't have to do this, but I'm going to. This is the divorce paperwork. My lawyer has already drafted it, and I suggest you sign it quickly. The sooner you do, the sooner we can both move on. He stared at the folder, his face pale. You really hate me that much? Hate you? I let out a bitter laugh. No, Tyler, I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you. You had everything. Someone who loved you, a home we built together, and you threw it all away because you couldn't see past your own ego. I stood, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. I want you out of here by the end of the day. Take your things and figure out where you're going to stay. This is the last time I'm giving you any grace. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine, he muttered. I'll go. Good, I said, walking toward the door. And don't even think about trying anything else. Chloe's already handling everything, and the next time you cross a line, I won't hesitate to let the courts handle it. As I opened the door, Tyler slowly stood, grabbing his coat. He didn't look at me as he walked out, his footsteps heavy with defeat. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for him, but for the life we could have had if he'd been the man I thought he was. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by a sense of relief. I closed the door behind him, locking it with the new key I'd had made. This was my home now, and no one, especially not Tyler, would take it away from me again. The silence in the apartment after Tyler left was deafening. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The space no longer felt heavy with his presence, his entitlement, or his lies. It was just me, the home I'd built, and the quiet realization that I had won, not just against him, but against every doubt I'd ever had about standing up for myself. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the emptiness where his things had been. His oversized gaming chair, the framed jerseys that had cluttered the walls, and the gaudy coffee table he'd insisted on keeping were all gone. The apartment looked cleaner, brighter, like it was mine again. Lauren came by that evening with takeout and a bottle of wine. "Is he really gone?" she asked, plopping down on the couch with a dramatic sigh. "Gone and not coming back," I said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. I gave him until the end of the day to pack his things. He didn't argue. Lauren raised her glass. "To fresh starts and well-deserved victories." I clinked my glass against hers, feeling the weight of the past week slowly lifting. To never letting someone walk all over me again. Over the next few days, I began to reclaim the apartment piece by piece. I rearranged the furniture, moved my favorite artwork into the living room, and filled the space with things that made me happy. It wasn't just about redecorating, it was about turning the apartment into a reflection of who I was, not the person Tyler had tried to make me. Chloe called with updates on the legal proceedings, her voice filled with the kind of confidence that made me feel invincible. "The fraud charges are off the table since the buyer decided not to pursue them," she explained. "But the divorce paperwork is moving along smoothly. Once Tyler signs, you'll be officially free." Hearing the word free made my chest tighten. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about everything I'd been carrying for years. The resentment, the self-doubt, the feeling of being trapped in a marriage that didn't value me. It was all finally being lifted. Tyler tried to reach out a few times. His messages ranged from half-hearted apologies to pathetic attempts to guilt me into reconciling. "I made a mistake," one read. "Can't we at least talk about this?" Another was more desperate. "You're going to ruin me, Amelia. Is that what you want?" I didn't reply. For once, I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. He'd made his choices, and now he was dealing with the consequences. By the end of the week, the apartment felt like a completely new space, warm, inviting, and entirely mine. As I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, the city lights twinkling outside the window, I thought about everything that had happened. Tyler's betrayal had been a shock, but it had also been a wake-up call. For too long, I'd let myself believe that I didn't deserve better, that I had to settle for whatever scraps of respect and love he decided to throw my way. But now, I knew better. I wasn't just reclaiming my apartment, I was reclaiming my life. A month later, my life looked completely different. The apartment was unrecognizable, not because of any drastic renovations, but because of how it felt. It was a space that reflected me, my tastes, my personality, and my newfound independence. The absence of Tyler's clutter and his overbearing presence made the home feel lighter, freer. The divorce was moving along smoothly. Chloe had handled everything with precision, ensuring Tyler had no room to argue or complicate the process. He signed the papers without much fuss, likely realizing that he had no leverage. There was no grand showdown, no emotional plea to work things out. Just a cold, clean break that felt both bittersweet and deeply satisfying. One day, as I sorted through some old papers, I came across a photo of Tyler and me from our early years together. We were smiling, arms around each other, full of hope and promise. I stared at it for a moment, letting the memories wash over me. There had been good times, moments when I truly believed we were building a life together. But those moments were gone, overshadowed by years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. I tucked the photo into an envelope and put it away in a drawer. It wasn't worth keeping out in the open, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. It was a part of my past, but it didn't define me anymore. Lauren and I celebrated the finalized divorce with dinner and drinks at a trendy rooftop bar downtown. "You're glowing," she said, raising her cocktail in a toast. "Single life suits you." I laughed, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "It's not the single life," I said. "It's the freedom. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm living under someone else's rules." We toasted to that, and as the night went on, I felt a growing sense of pride in myself. I'd faced one of the hardest moments of my life and come out stronger. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Back at home, I started planning for the future. The apartment had become more than a refuge. It was a symbol of everything I'd reclaimed. But I knew I wouldn't stay there forever. Someday, I'd move to a new place, one without any lingering shadows of my life with Tyler. Until then, I was determined to make the most of every moment in the space I had fought so hard to keep. As I curled up on the couch that night, a sense of peace washed over me. I thought about how Tyler had laughed during that phone call, so certain that he'd won, and I couldn't help but smile. His arrogance had been his downfall, and my quiet strength had been my salvation. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I called the shots, one where I chose happiness on my own terms. And after a long time, I felt truly free.
Greg, this is the last time you'll open our home to strangers without asking me. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter, eyes blazing at the scene before me. Come on, it's just Rob. He's like a brother. Greg looked up from his beer, a lazy grin plastered on his face. You know how my day was. I just wanted peace tonight. My tone wasn't just firm, it was a warning. Rob leaned back on the couch, clearly sensing the tension, but choosing to stay silent. He sipped on his beer, eyes flicking between Greg and me. It's not a big deal, Meredith. It's not like I threw a party, Greg chuckled. No, I said, crossing my arms, but it's the principle, respecting each other's space. Greg sighed, standing up and walking over to the fridge. He grabbed another beer, deliberately ignoring my feelings. My blood boiled hotter. This isn't the first time, Greg. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to control my anger. I was really looking forward to my show tonight. Greg popped open the beer, avoiding eye contact. You can still watch it. I looked at the clock, knowing the episode had already started. And how am I supposed to focus with you two laughing and chatting? Greg still didn't get it. Or maybe he didn't want to. Rob's here for one night. Chill out. Rob, sensing a storm brewing, finally spoke. Maybe I should leave. No, Rob, I said sharply, not taking my eyes off Greg. You're here now. Let's just get through it. Greg shrugged and took a lazy swig of his beer. See? No harm done. I seethed as I walked past them, heading to the bedroom. I couldn't deal with this again. It wasn't about Rob or anyone specific. It was about respect, something Greg seemed to lack when it came to our shared space. I closed the door behind me and sunk onto the bed. Turning on the TV, the familiar intro to my true crime show filled the room, but my mind was elsewhere. Greg's disregard wasn't new. This pattern had been going on for months. 10 minutes into the episode, Greg knocked on the door and entered before I could respond. Meredith, seriously? Let's not fight over this. I muted the TV, frustration boiling over. Greg, it's not about Rob. It's about you not taking my feelings seriously. Can't you see that? He gave a bad imitation of a remorseful look and sat down next to me. I guess I didn't think it was that big of a deal. You didn't think, I repeated, voice trembling not with sadness but with sheer anger. That's the whole problem. This is our home. You can't just invite people over without asking. Greg stayed silent. I continued, not letting him off the hook. I need you to understand how much this matters to me. He finally met my eyes, a flicker of realization but also resistance. All right, I get it. I'll ask next time. The way he said it, I wasn't convinced. It felt like a placation, a way to end the argument for now. Promise me, I demanded. Promise you'll respect our space. Yeah, he nodded, but the nonchalance in his eyes worried me. Sure. I watched him leave the room, the door closing with a quiet click. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing this issue was far from over. It was about more than just friends and unexpected visits. It was about respect, and that was something Greg seemed to have a hard time grasping. As the muted TV flickered shadows on the walls, I realized the real struggle had just begun. The next morning, I woke up early, the weight of yesterday still heavy on my mind. Greg was snoring lightly next to me, oblivious to the turmoil he had caused. I didn't want to start the day with more arguments, but I knew that we needed to have a real conversation about last night. I got dressed and went downstairs, choosing to wait for Greg to wake up. I busied myself with making coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen and providing some comfort. About an hour later, Greg finally stumbled into the kitchen, scratching his head and yawning. "Morning," he mumbled. I didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on pouring coffee into 2 mugs. Finally, I turned to him. "We need to talk." Greg looked at me with a hint of annoyance. "About what? Rob's gone now. Can't we just let it go?" "No, Greg, we can't just let it go." I handed him a mug, my eyes hard. "You keep inviting people over without asking me. Last night was just another example of you not respecting my space." He sighed dramatically. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Meredith." "Am I?" I challenged, setting my mug down with a thud. "Every time this happens, you brush it off like it's nothing. But it's not nothing to me. What do you want me to do? Start sending you calendar invites?" Greg scoffed. "I want you to think about me before making decisions that affect both of us." "Is that too much to ask?" Greg rolled his eyes. "You know what your problem is? You're too rigid. You need to relax. Life isn't just about schedules and rules." I felt my fists clench. "You're missing the point. This is about respect, Greg. Respect for our home and for each other. I'm not asking for much." He took a sip of his coffee, avoiding my eyes. "I'll try to remember next time, all right? Can we drop it now?" I didn't believe him. His dismissive tone told me all I needed to know. "This isn't the first time this has happened, Greg. It's becoming a pattern, and it's not just about last night. There have been plenty of other times." I paused, expecting him to argue, but he stayed silent. Emboldened, I continued, "Every time you do this, it makes me feel like you don't care about my needs, like I'm invisible." Greg finally looked up, irritation clear on his face. "Are you seriously going to make this into a big deal? It was one night, Meredith." I shook my head, tears of frustration welling up. "That's exactly it. You always think it's just one night, one small thing, but those small things keep piling up." He set his mug down more forcefully than necessary. "Fine, from now on, I'll ask. Happy?" "No, because I don't believe you mean it," I replied, voice trembling but firm. "I need you to understand that this is serious. If you keep ignoring my feelings, this won't work." Greg stared at me, seemingly taken aback by my ultimatum. "You're really serious, aren't you?" "Yes, Greg, I am." I turned away, needing to get some distance. "Think about what I've said." As I walked out of the kitchen, I knew that this wasn't the end of our argument, but at least I had made it clear that things needed to change. I came home from work later that week, hoping for a quiet evening, but the sound of laughter hit me as soon as I opened the door. Greg was sitting in the living room with 2 of his friends, beers on the coffee table, the TV blaring. "Hey, you're home," Greg said, barely looking up. I forced a smile, trying to hide my frustration. "I see we have more guests." One of his friends, Kevin, nodded at me. "Hey, Meredith. Greg said it was cool to come over." I gritted my teeth, shooting a look at Greg. "Can I talk to you in the kitchen for a second?" Greg sighed but followed me. Once we were out of earshot, I turned to him. "What did we just talk about last week?" He shrugged, clearly annoyed. "What now?" "I asked you to inform me before inviting people over. You promised, Greg." "I forgot. It's not a big deal," he said, crossing his arms defensively. "It is a big deal to me," I said, my voice rising. "You keep ignoring my feelings. It's like you don't even care." He rolled his eyes. "You're overreacting, Meredith. We're just hanging out." "No, I'm not overreacting. You keep doing this, and it's disrespectful. I need peace when I come home." Greg leaned against the counter, shaking his head. "You're acting like a control freak. Lighten up." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "This isn't about control. It's about respect. This is our home. Both of us need a say." "Whatever," he muttered, already walking back to his friends. I stood there, feeling the sting of his words. This wasn't going anywhere. I knew then that Greg had no intention of changing. The realization settled heavily in my chest. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the muffled sounds of their laughter and chatter seeped through the walls. It was hopeless. Greg didn't care about my needs or the impact of his actions on our relationship. As the night dragged on, my resolve hardened. If he wouldn't respect our space, I would make sure to reclaim it myself. The following morning, Greg was already up and about, seemingly oblivious to the argument from the night before. I found him in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. "We need to talk," I said, stepping in. "Again?" Greg sighed, not even looking up. "Yes, again. Because things haven't changed. You keep dismissing me, Greg, and it's not okay." He finally looked up, irritation evident. "What do you want from me, Meredith? I said I'd try to remember. Can you just drop it?" "No, I can't just drop it. If you can't respect this one simple request, what else won't you respect?" Greg threw his hands up. "Fine. You want respect? Respect works both ways. Stop nagging me about every little thing." I took a step back, hurt by his outburst. "I'm not nagging. I'm asking for basic consideration." Greg scoffed. "You know what? Maybe you're too sensitive. Maybe that's the problem." I felt a lump in my throat, but pushed it down. "Maybe, but that doesn't excuse your behavior." He stared at me, unyielding. "I'll do better. This conversation is over." But as he stormed out, I knew it wasn't. This was far from over. Respect wasn't something you demanded. It was earned. And if Greg couldn't see that, then I needed to take steps to protect myself and my peace. There was no turning back now. Greg had shown his true colors, and it was time for me to act. The days moved forward in an uncomfortable truce. Greg seemed more irritable, his attitude flaring up without warning. I, on the other hand, sank deeper into planning. The next incident had to be handled decisively. One evening after work, I decided to put my foot down. "Greg, we need to talk," I said as he lounged on the couch, aimlessly flipping through channels. He huffed, but muted the TV. "What is it this time?" I sat down across from him, eyes unwavering. "No more uninvited guests without informing me first." Greg smirked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Sure. I'll send out a notification next time," he joked. I leaned forward, seriousness radiating from me. "I mean it, Greg. This is non-negotiable. We are in this together. Respect my wishes or we will have a serious problem." He gave a nonchalant shrug. "Fine. No more surprises. Happy now? You promise?" I pressed. Yeah, I promise," he said, waving me off. The following week, the atmosphere felt lighter initially. Maybe, just maybe, he'd finally understood. But deep down, I remained skeptical. Friday came, and as soon as I walked through the door, the sound of loud music and laughter greeted me. My heart sank. "Greg!" I shouted over the noise. He sauntered over, a drink in his hand, smiling like he owned the place. "Hey, babe, welcome home. Great timing." I glared at him, fury building. "What is this, Greg? We talked about this." "It's just a small get-together," he said, as if it explained everything. Don't be such a buzzkill." "Small get-together? There are at least 10 people here. This isn't what we agreed on," I said, my voice trembling with anger. Greg took a sip of his drink, unbothered. "Relax, Meredith. It's the weekend. Just have a drink and join us." I shook my head, feeling the last straw break. "This is it, Greg. I can't take this anymore." He laughed, his tone mocking. Don't be dramatic. It's just a party." I turned on my heel and stormed out, heading straight to our bedroom. As the door shut behind me, I picked up my phone and called the divorce lawyer I had researched weeks before. It was time to take action. Over the next few days, I began to quietly prepare. I gathered documents, bank statements, anything that might be useful. I stayed out of Greg's way, avoiding unnecessary confrontation. But the tension was palpable. One evening, Greg confronted me. "You've been weirdly quiet lately. What's going on?" I looked at him dispassionately. "Just thinking about a lot of things." "Are you still upset about the party?" "Meredith, you really need to let it go." "I can't, Greg. It's not just the party. It's everything. This isn't working anymore." He frowned, confusion turning into anger. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I need respect, and you're clearly incapable of giving it. I'm done." Greg laughed, though it was hollow and uneasy. "You're bluffing." I faced him, resolute. "No, I'm not. I spoke to a lawyer." The color drained from his face. "A lawyer? Are you insane?" "No, just tired. Tired of not being heard, of not being respected. This isn't a game, Greg. It's my life, and I'm taking it back." Greg's expression turned dark. "You'll regret this, Meredith." But as I walked away, the only thing I felt was an overwhelming sense of clarity. There was no turning back. My next steps were firmly in place. Coming home one evening, I hoped for quiet. Instead, I walked into chaos. Music blared, voices echoed, the unmistakable signs of another party. My stomach clenched, anger rising. I pushed through the mess of shoes and coats littering the hallway. "Greg!" I called out. No response. I found him in the living room, surrounded by friends, drink in hand, the party in full swing. He looked up and saw me, a slow smirk spreading across his face. "Meredith, join us, why don't you?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Greg, we need to talk. Now." Ignoring my tone, he laughed. "Everyone, meet the boss of the house," he said, clearly amused at his own joke. People glanced at me, some sympathetic, others just curious. I felt a mix of embarrassment and fury. "Greg, now!" He shrugged, setting his drink down and following me into the kitchen. As soon as the door closed behind us, I turned to him, eyes blazing. "What is this? We talked about this. No more parties." He leaned against the counter, unbothered. "You're being dramatic. It's just a few friends." "No, Greg. This is disrespectful and you keep doing it." I could feel my hands shaking. Greg's expression turned cold. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's just one night." "One night?" I scoffed. "This is the third time this month. I've had enough." "You need to chill, Meredith," he replied, dismissive. "Life can't be all rules and schedules." "I can't live like this, Greg. I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, my voice firm. His face twisted in surprise, then anger. "A lawyer? For what? This?" "Yes, Greg, this," I said, gesturing around. "It's clear you don't care about my feelings. You promised to respect our home, and you broke that promise." He took a step closer, sneering. "You're really going to throw away our marriage over a couple of parties?" "Yes, I am. Because it's not just the parties. It's the constant disrespect, the disregard for my feelings. I'm done." He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "You think you can just walk away? Good luck, Meredith. You'll regret this." I didn't flinch. "Maybe, but it can't be worse than this." Without another word, I walked past him, grabbed my phone, and went to the bedroom. My hands were shaking as I called the lawyer again, setting up a meeting to finalize the papers. I couldn't keep doing this. Later that night, after everyone left, Greg stumbled into the bedroom. "So that's it? We're done?" He slurred, clearly drunk. "Yes, Greg, we're done," I said, not looking up from packing a small bag. "I'm leaving tonight." He grabbed my arm, making me look at him. "You won't survive without me." I pulled my arm free. "Watch me." Leaving the house felt surreal, like stepping out of a nightmare. As I drove away, the weight on my chest started to lift. This was just the beginning, but it was my beginning. There was no going back. My next chapter started now. I woke up early, the sun barely breaking through the curtains. The divorce papers lay on the nightstand, staring at me like a challenge waiting to be met. Today was the day. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of resolve and anxiety. By the time Greg woke up and stumbled into the kitchen, I was ready. I placed the papers on the table, my heart pounding. "Good morning," Greg groaned, not yet noticing the documents. "Morning," I replied, my voice calm. "We need to talk." He finally saw the papers and froze. "What's this?" "Divorce papers," I said with finality. "I'm serious, Greg. You need to sign them." His eyes widened with a mix of shock and anger. "You're really doing this?" "Yes, I am," I said. "You had every chance to change. I need respect and peace, and you can't give me that." He grabbed the papers and waved them at me. "This is insane. You're throwing away everything over a few arguments?" "It's not just a few arguments, Greg. It's about trust, respect, all the things you seem to lack." He slapped the papers back on the table. "You'll regret this, Meredith. You think you won, but you haven't." I held my ground, my voice steady. "This isn't about winning or losing. It's about my peace and my future." He stared at me for a long moment before finally slumping into a chair. "Fine. You want your precious respect? Here," he said, grabbing a pen and scrawling his signature angrily. "Take it." A wave of relief washed over me, but I remained composed. "Thank you." As he handed the papers back, his eyes darkened. "Don't think for a second that this is over. You'll see." The threat hung in the air, but I didn't flinch. "Goodbye, Greg," I said, turning away and heading out the door. The fresh air hitting my face felt liberating. The next few days flew by. I moved into a small, cozy apartment across town. It was a fresh start, a new beginning that I desperately needed. I dedicated myself to my work, pouring my energy into something constructive. My colleagues noticed the shift, offering support and encouragement. During a quiet evening, as I was organizing my thoughts, my phone rang. It was Dorothy, Greg's mother. "Meredith, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm. "Of course, Dorothy. What's going on?" "Come over to the house. We need to discuss this in person." I drove over, nervous but determined. Dorothy greeted me at the door, her expression serious. "I heard about the divorce," she said as we sat down in the living room. "Yes, it was a difficult decision, but necessary." She nodded, her gaze piercing. "I need you to know something about Greg. His father, he had similar issues. I never intervened, thinking he would change, but he never did." I was stunned, but I listened intently. "Greg has been irresponsible and manipulative, even with money. He's accrued debts in your name and drained the joint account." My stomach clenched. "How could he do this?" Dorothy sighed, eyes filled with regret. "I thought he'd grow out of it. Apparently I was wrong." I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. "What do I do now?" Dorothy reached out, taking my hand. "I stand with you on this. We need to set things right. I'll help in any way I can." Her support was a lifeline. Together, we devised a plan to confront Greg and hold him accountable. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring such deceit wouldn't go unpunished. As I drove back to my apartment later that night, a sense of determination settled over me. Greg wasn't going to get away with this. The fight was far from over, but I wasn't alone anymore. I stood outside Greg's apartment, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and determination. Dorothy's words echoed in my mind, stealing my resolve. Today was the day I confronted Greg with the financial deceit he'd been hiding. I knocked firmly. A moment later, the door swung open. Greg, looking disheveled, stared at me in surprise. "Meredith? What the hell are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him and into the apartment. Dorothy followed, her presence a silent support. Greg closed the door, clearly annoyed. "What's this about?" "I found out about the debts, Greg. The ones you racked up in my name," I said bluntly, eyes locked on his. His face went pale, but then he laughed, a nervous, mocking sound. "Oh, come on. You're overreacting. They're just a few charges." Dorothy stepped forward, her expression stern. "Don't lie, Greg. We have the evidence." Greg's eyes flickered with anger. "So what? You're here to gang up on me? Make me the bad guy?" "You are the bad guy," I said, keeping my voice level. "You betrayed my trust, and now you need to own up to it." He sneered, crossing his arms. "And if I don't, then we'll take legal action." "Fraud is a serious crime, Greg," Dorothy said, her tone unyielding. Greg's defiance wavered. He looked between us, his bravado starting to crack. "Fine. What do you want?" "Repay every cent you took from the joint account. Clear all debts in my name," I demanded. "And I want it in writing," he scoffed. "You think I have that kind of money just lying around?" Dorothy stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Then sell your assets, figure it out. You created this mess, you will fix it." Greg's face contorted with frustration and fear. "You're ruining my life, Meredith." "No, Greg," I said quietly. "You ruined mine. I'm just taking it back." He glared at me, then at Dorothy. "You both can't do this." Dorothy's voice was calm but firm. "We already have. I've spoken to a lawyer too. If you don't comply, they'll take it from here." Greg's shoulders slumped. He looked defeated, a shadow of the man who had once thought he had all the power. "Fine. I'll do it. Anything to get you off my back." "Good," I said, relief washing over me. "I'll have the paperwork ready by the end of the week. Sign it, and we'll be done." We turned to leave, but Greg called out, "Meredith, wait." I paused, not looking back. "What is it, Greg?" "I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer, though still tinged with bitterness. I turned around, meeting his eyes. "Too late for that, Greg. Actions have consequences. I hope you learn from this." Dorothy and I walked out, the weight of confrontation lifting slightly. As we reached my car, she turned to me, her expression softening. "You did well in there." "Thanks to you," I said, gratitude filling my voice. "I couldn't have done it alone." She nodded. "Now focus on your future. Don't let him drag you down again." Driving away, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The battle was far from over, but I had allies. Greg's manipulations had come to light, and I was taking control of my life. A sense of empowerment surged within me. This was just the beginning of my journey towards reclaiming my happiness. Moving out of Greg's shadow felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in the dark. I settled into my new apartment, finding comfort in the quiet simplicity of my own space. There were no more unexpected parties, no more shouting matches, just peace. One evening, as I was settling into my new home routine, my phone rang. It was my lawyer, Sarah. "Meredith, I have some good news," she said, her voice calm but decisive. "We've settled the financial issues with Greg. He's agreed to repay everything." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you, Sarah. This means so much." "Of course," she replied. "We'll make sure he complies with the agreement. Don't worry about a thing." Hanging up, a deep sense of completion settled over me. But I knew that Greg wouldn't make it easy. A few weeks later, I received a call from an unknown number. Picking up, I was greeted by Greg's voice, strained and desperate. "Meredith, please, can we talk?" he pleaded. "What is it, Greg?" I kept my tone flat, emotions in check. "I'm struggling. I don't know how to deal with all this, selling the house, repaying debts. It's too much," he said, voice cracking slightly. "That's the consequence of your actions, Greg. You brought this upon yourself," I replied, feeling a pang of pity but quickly pushing it aside. "Can we at least meet up? Just to talk things over?" he asked, desperation clear in his tone. "No, Greg. We're done. The papers are signed, and the agreement is in place. I have nothing more to say to you," I said firmly. "You can't be this cold, Meredith. I need help," he tried again. "I helped you for too long, Greg. Now you have to help yourself," I said, hanging up before he could respond. I knew his plea was another attempt to manipulate me, to drag me back into his web of chaos, but I was beyond that now. My focus was on healing, rebuilding, and moving forward. Dorothy visited me a few days later, bringing over a housewarming gift. "How's the new place?" she asked, looking around. "It's perfect. Peaceful," I said, smiling genuinely. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, sighing. "Greg called me too. He's struggling." "I know," I replied. "He called me asking for help." She shook her head. "He needs to learn responsibility. This is the only way." "I agree," I said. "Thank you for your support, Dorothy. I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled, taking my hand. "You're strong, Meredith. Don't ever doubt that." As days turned into weeks, Greg's situation worsened. Forced to sell assets to pay back the debts, his life of reckless abandon came crashing down. I watched from a distance, detached, as he scrambled to pick up the pieces. In contrast, my life took a turn for the better. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could channel my energy into something productive. My colleagues noticed the change, often complimenting my renewed focus and determination. One day, Sarah called again with the final update. "Greg has completed the payments. Everything's settled now." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, feeling truly free for the first time in years. After the call, I took a moment to reflect. Greg was a chapter of my life that had closed. Now it was time to write new ones, filled with peace, respect, and self-love. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over my new apartment, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The darkness of the past was behind me, and the future was bright with possibilities. Greg might still reach out, but his calls would go unanswered. I had reclaimed my life, and it was mine to cherish. The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my reverie. I rushed to the kitchen, my heart pounding, to find Emily standing amidst a sea of broken shards, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was trying to reach the good glasses for graduation, and I dropped them." I exhaled, relief washing over me. "It's okay, sweetheart. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, and I carefully navigated the minefield of glass to reach her. As I wrapped my arms around her, I couldn't help but notice how tall she'd grown. My stepdaughter was no longer the little girl I'd first met all those years ago. "Where's Dad?" Emily asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I stiffened involuntarily. "Working late again, I suppose?" Emily pulled away, her eyes searching mine. "He's been working late a lot lately, hasn't he?" Before I could respond, the front door slammed, and Daniel's voice boomed through the house. "Evelyn? Emily? Where are you two?" I felt Emily tense beside me. "In the kitchen," I called out, forcing a cheeriness I didn't feel into my voice. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and his shirt rumpled. His eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. "What happened here?" "Just a little accident," I said, moving to grab the broom. "Nothing to worry about." "Nothing to worry about?" Daniel's voice rose. "Those were my grandmother's crystal glasses, Evelyn. How could you be so careless?" I froze, broom in hand. "I wasn't." "It was my fault, Dad," Emily interjected. I was trying to get them down for graduation, and... Graduation? Daniel's brow furrowed. That's not for another week, is it? The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as realization dawned on Emily's face, quickly followed by hurt and disappointment. It's this Saturday, Dad, she said quietly. I reminded you last week, remember? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking flustered. Of course. I've just been so busy with work lately, it must have slipped my mind. I felt a familiar anger bubbling up inside me. Maybe if you were home more often, these things wouldn't slip your mind, I snapped. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means exactly what it sounds like, I retorted, my patience wearing thin. You're never here, Daniel. You're missing everything important in Emily's life. I'm providing for this family, Daniel shouted, his face reddening. Someone has to pay the bills around here. Stop it, Emily cried out, tears streaming down her face. Just stop fighting. The sight of her distress doused my anger like a bucket of cold water. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Emily, sweetie, why don't you go to your room? I'll clean this up. She hesitated for a moment, looking between us before nodding and fleeing the kitchen. As soon as she was gone, Daniel rounded on me. What the hell was that about, Evelyn? Undermining me in front of my own daughter? I met his gaze steadily. Your daughter needs you present, Daniel, not just your money. He scoffed. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm doing everything I can for this family. As he stormed out of the kitchen, I couldn't help but wonder if that was true. The nagging doubts I'd been pushing aside for months came rushing back. Where was he really going all those late nights? Why did he always smell faintly of perfume I didn't wear? I gripped the broom tightly, my knuckles turning white. Something had to change, and soon. For Emily's sake, and for my own. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Daniel's late nights had become more frequent, and his excuses increasingly flimsy. It wasn't until Emily approached me one afternoon, her face etched with worry, that my suspicions truly took root. Mom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I think Dad's cheating on you. The words hit me like a physical blow. What makes you say that, sweetie? Emily's eyes darted around nervously before she pulled out her phone. I saw a text on his phone last night when he left it on the counter. It was from someone named Stacy. Look. My hands trembled as I took the phone. The message was brief, but damning. Can't wait to see you tonight, handsome? Same place? I felt the blood drain from my face. Oh, Emily, I breathed, pulling her into a hug. I'm so sorry you had to see this. She clung to me tightly. What are we going to do? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. We're going to find out the truth. That night, after Daniel left for another late meeting, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed him. The guilt gnawed at me as I trailed his car through the city, but it was quickly overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. He pulled up to a small Italian restaurant on the outskirts of town. Through the window, I watched as he greeted a young, blonde woman with a kiss that was far from platonic. My world shattered. I don't remember driving home. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in our driveway, tears streaming down my face. Emily found me there, still clutching the steering wheel. Mom? Her voice broke through my haze. Did you find out? I nodded, unable to speak. Emily climbed into the passenger seat and wrapped her arms around me. We sat there in silence, our shared pain a tangible thing between us. Finally, I found my voice. We can't stay here, Emily, not with him. She pulled back, her eyes wide. What do you mean? I mean we need to leave, start over somewhere new. The words tumbled out, gaining strength as I spoke. You're graduating soon. We could move, find a new place, just the two of us. Emily's face was a mix of emotions, fear, excitement, uncertainty. But what about Dad? What about everything here? I took her hand in mine. Your father made his choice. Now it's time for us to make ours. We deserve better than this, Emily. Both of us do. She nodded slowly, a spark of determination lighting in her eyes. Okay, let's do it. The next few days were a whirlwind of secret planning and barely contained emotions. I reached out to an old college friend who owned a real estate company in a city a few hours away. She offered me a job on the spot, sensing the urgency in my voice. All the while, we maintained a facade of normalcy around Daniel. It was excruciating, watching him lie so effortlessly about his whereabouts, knowing what I knew. The breaking point came 3 days before Emily's graduation. Daniel stumbled in late, reeking of alcohol and perfume. I was waiting for him in the living room. "Have a good meeting?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. He froze, his eyes darting around the room. "What are you talking about?" I stood, my anger finally boiling over. "I know about Stacy, Daniel. I know everything." The color drained from his face. "Evelyn, I can explain." "Save it," I snapped. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I want you out of this house, now." He stumbled towards me, reaching out. "Please, let's talk about this. We can work it out." I stepped back, my resolve hardening. "There's nothing to work out. We're done, Daniel. Emily and I are leaving after her graduation. Don't try to stop us." As I watched him crumble before me, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The life we had built was over, but a new one was just beginning. Emily and I would face it together, stronger for having weathered this storm. I turned and walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone in the wreckage of our marriage. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. The morning after my confrontation with Daniel, I woke to find the house eerily quiet. A note on the kitchen counter told me he'd gone to stay with a friend for a few days. I crumpled it up, a mix of relief and anxiety churning in my stomach. Emily padded into the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. "Is he gone?" I nodded, pulling her into a hug. "For now. But we need to move fast, sweetie. Are you sure you're okay with this?" She pulled back, her jaw set with determination. "I'm sure, Mom. We deserve better." I squeezed her hand, marveling at her strength. "All right, then. Let's get to work." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I reached out to my old college friend, Sarah, who owned a real estate company in a city 3 hours away. When I explained our situation, she didn't hesitate. "Evelyn, I have the perfect position for you," Sarah said, her voice crackling over the phone. "We need a new head of marketing, and with your experience, you'd be perfect. When can you start?" I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "After Emily's graduation next week." "Is that too soon?" "Not at all. I'll email you the details. And Evelyn, you're doing the right thing." With a job secured, I turned my attention to finding us a place to live. Emily and I huddled over my laptop, scrolling through apartment listings. "What about this one?" Emily pointed to a cozy 2-bedroom near her new school. I clicked on it, scanning the details. "It's perfect, Em. Let's schedule a virtual tour." As we made plans, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. Daniel had been a part of our lives for so long. Was I doing the right thing, uprooting everything? My doubts were shattered that evening when Daniel came home unexpectedly. The smell of alcohol hit me before I even saw him. "Evelyn," he slurred, stumbling into the living room, "we need to talk." I stood, putting myself between him and Emily. "You're drunk, Daniel. This isn't the time." He lurched forward, grabbing my arm. "No, you can't leave me. I won't let you." Emily jumped up, her face pale. "Dad, stop it. You're hurting her." His grip tightened, and I winced. "Daniel, let go, now." For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by anger and fear. He released me, stumbling back. "You'll regret this," he muttered, before storming out of the house. As the door slammed behind him, Emily burst into tears. I pulled her close, my own heart racing. "It's okay, sweetie. We're okay," I murmured, stroking her hair. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "What if he tries to stop us?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "He won't. I won't let him." That night, after Emily had finally fallen asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. I knew we had to leave sooner than planned. Daniel's outburst had made that clear. I pulled out my phone, dialing Sarah's number. She answered on the second ring. "Evelyn, is everything okay?" I took a shaky breath. "Sarah, I hate to ask this, but is there any way we could move up my start date? Things have escalated here." There was a pause, and I held my breath. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Of course, I'll make it work. Do you need help getting out?" Tears of relief stung my eyes. "Thank you, and no, I think we can manage. We just need to leave as soon as possible." As I hung up, I heard a noise behind me. Emily stood in the doorway, her face a mix of fear and determination. "I heard everything," she said quietly. "When do we leave?" I stood, crossing the room to embrace her. "Tomorrow. We'll leave right after your graduation ceremony." She nodded against my shoulder. "Good. I'm ready." As we stood there, holding each other in the quiet kitchen, I felt a surge of love and pride for my brave, resilient daughter. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. But first, we had to make it through one last day in this house. One last confrontation with Daniel. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but I pushed it aside. We were so close to freedom. Nothing could stop us now. The morning of Emily's graduation dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. As I helped Emily into her gown, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I said, smoothing down her collar. Emily's smile was tinged with sadness. "I wish we didn't have to leave like this, Mom." I cupped her face in my hands. "I know, but sometimes we have to make hard choices to protect ourselves. Are you having second thoughts?" She shook her head firmly. "No, I'm ready." As we drove to the school, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Daniel's car following us. But the streets were mercifully empty. The graduation ceremony was a blur of speeches and applause. I spotted Daniel in the crowd, his eyes red-rimmed and his suit rumpled. My heart clenched, but I pushed the feeling aside. We were so close to freedom. As Emily walked across the stage to receive her diploma, I felt a surge of pride and determination. We were doing the right thing. After the ceremony, we made our way through the crowd of well-wishers. I kept Emily close, my eyes scanning for Daniel. Suddenly he appeared in front of us, blocking our path. "Congratulations, Emily," he said, his voice strained. "I'm so proud of you." Emily tensed beside me. "Thanks, Dad." Daniel's eyes locked onto mine. "Evelyn, can we talk? Please?" I hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the need to end this cleanly. 5 minutes, Daniel, that's all." We stepped away from the crowd, Emily hovering nervously nearby. Daniel's facade crumbled as soon as we were alone. "Please don't do this, Evelyn. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I'll do anything." I steeled myself against the pain in his eyes. "It's too late for that, Daniel. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You can't take my daughter away from me." I wrenched free, anger flaring. "She's not just your daughter. I've been more of a parent to her than you ever were." Daniel's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this. I'll fight you every step of the way. You'll never get away with." His tirade was cut short by Emily's voice, sharp and clear. "Stop it, Dad. Just stop." We both turned to see her standing there, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not a child anymore. I can make my own decisions, and I choose to go with Mom. You did this, not her." Daniel stumbled back as if he'd been struck. "Emily, please." But she was already walking away, her head held high. I moved to follow her, but Daniel's hand shot out, grabbing my purse. "If you're leaving, you're not taking anything that's mine," he snarled. In that moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. The purse strap snapped, spilling its contents across the ground. Among the scattered items was a small velvet box, the one containing my grandmother's ring, the last piece of my life before Daniel. As he bent to snatch it up, a fierce protectiveness surged through me. I lunged forward, my hand closing around the box just as his fingers grazed it. "This isn't yours," I hissed, clutching the box to my chest. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Then his face hardened, and he straightened up. "Fine," he spat. "Take it. Take everything. But don't think this is over." As he stormed away, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Emily stood beside me, her face a mix of determination and fear. "Are you okay, Mom?" I nodded, my heart racing. "I am now. Let's go home, pack our things, and get out of here." As we walked to the car, I realized that this was it, the point of no return. We were leaving behind everything we knew, stepping into an uncertain future. But looking at Emily's brave face, I knew we could handle whatever came next. We had each other, and that was all that mattered. The day before Emily's graduation, I woke with a start, my heart pounding. Time was running out, and we still had so much to do. I crept downstairs, careful not to wake Daniel, who had finally come home late last night. In the dim light of dawn, I began gathering the last of our important documents: birth certificates, passports, bank statements, anything we'd need for our new life. As I rifled through Daniel's desk, my hands trembling, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. A prenuptial agreement. One I had never seen before, let alone signed. My mind raced as I scanned the document, According to this, if we divorced, I would be entitled to nothing. No alimony, no share of our assets. How could I have missed this? Just then, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Panic surged through me as I quickly shoved the document into my bag and tried to look casual. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "What are you doing in here so early?" I forced a smile. "Just organizing some papers for Emily's college applications. You know how scattered she can be." He grunted, unconvinced. "Right. Well, don't mess with my stuff." As he shuffled to the kitchen, I let out a shaky breath. That was too close. The rest of the day passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Emily and I packed our bags in secret, hiding them in the trunk of my car under the guise of donating old clothes. As evening fell, Daniel announced he was going out. "Got a work thing," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. The moment the door closed behind him, Emily turned to me. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." Her tone sent a chill down my spine. "What is it, sweetie?" She took a deep breath. "I overheard Dad on the phone last night. He knows we're planning to leave. He's going to try to stop us after the graduation ceremony." My mind reeled. How could he know? Had we been too careless? "Did you hear anything else?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Emily shook her head. Just that he was going to take care of it tomorrow. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. Everything we'd planned was falling apart. With the prenup I'd discovered and Daniel's knowledge of our escape, we were more trapped than ever. "What are we going to do?" Emily's voice was small, scared. I looked up at her, my brave, beautiful daughter who had already been through so much. In that moment, I knew I had to be strong for her. "We're going to change the plan," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "We can't wait until after the ceremony. We need to leave tonight." Emily's eyes widened. "But what about graduation? My diploma?" "I know it's not ideal, sweetheart, but your safety is more important than a piece of paper. We can get your record sent to your new school later." She nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Okay, what do we do?" I stood up, my mind racing. "Pack only what you absolutely need. We'll leave in an hour while your father's still out." As Emily hurried upstairs, I pulled out my phone and dialed Sarah's number. "Sarah, it's Evelyn. I hate to ask this, but is there any way we could come tonight? Things have escalated here." There was a pause. Then Sarah's voice came through, warm and reassuring. "Of course, Evelyn. I'll have everything ready for you. Just be safe, okay?" Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you. We will." I hung up and took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This wasn't how I'd imagined our fresh start, sneaking away in the dead of night, but sometimes the path to freedom isn't straight or easy. As I began gathering our things, I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart stopped. Daniel was home early. In that moment, I knew our window of opportunity was closing fast. It was now or never. We had to leave, and we had to leave now. "Emily," I called up the stairs, my voice urgent. "It's time. We have to go. Now." My heart pounded as I heard Daniel's key in the lock. Emily appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide with panic. "Go out the back," I whispered urgently. "I'll distract him." She nodded, slipping silently down the stairs and towards the kitchen. I took a deep breath and moved to intercept Daniel. He stumbled through the door, reeking of alcohol. His eyes narrowed as he saw me. "What are you doing up?" I forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep. How was your work thing?" He grunted, pushing past me. "Fine. Where's Emily?" "Asleep," I lied smoothly. "Big day tomorrow, remember?" Daniel paused, his gaze sharpening. "Right. Graduation." I held my breath as he looked around suspiciously. Had he noticed the missing photos, the empty spaces where our lives used to be? Suddenly, a crash echoed from the kitchen. Daniel's head snapped up. What was that? Before I could stop him, he was striding towards the sound. I followed, my heart in my throat. We burst into the kitchen to find Emily frozen by the back door, a broken vase at her feet. Her overnight bag was clutched in her hand. Daniel's face contorted with rage. "What the hell is going on?" Emily's eyes met mine, filled with fear and determination. In that moment, I knew we couldn't run anymore. It was time to face this head on. "We're leaving, Daniel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's over." He whirled on me, his fists clenched. "Like hell you are. You're not taking my daughter anywhere." Emily stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm not your property, Dad. I'm going with Mom, and you can't stop us." Daniel's face turned an alarming shade of red. He lunged forward, grabbing Emily's arm. "You ungrateful little—" I didn't think, I just reacted. My hand connected with Daniel's face with a resounding slap. He staggered back, shock replacing anger. "Don't you dare touch her," I hissed. For a moment the kitchen was silent, except for our heavy breathing. Then Daniel straightened, a cold smile spreading across his face. "You think you can leave? Good luck with that." He pulled out his phone, waving it tauntingly. "One call to my lawyer and you'll be left with nothing. Remember that prenup you signed?" My blood ran cold. The prenup I'd found earlier, the one I'd never actually signed. He was bluffing, but Emily didn't know that. I saw the doubt flicker in her eyes. "Mom?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would define our future. I could cave to Daniel's threats, stay in this toxic marriage for financial security, or I could take a leap of faith, trusting in the strength Emily and I had built together. "You're right, Daniel," I said calmly. "I might walk away with nothing material, but I'll have what matters most, my integrity and my daughter." I turned to Emily, holding out my hand. "It's your choice, sweetheart. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." The seconds stretched like hours as Emily looked between us. Then, with a resolute nod, she took my hand. Daniel's facade cracked. "You can't do this. I'll fight you every step of the way. Save it for the lawyers," I cut him off. "We're done here." As we walked out the front door, Daniel's threats fading behind us, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Emily squeezed my hand as we got into the car. "Are you sure about this, Mom? What if he's right about the prenup?" I started the engine, a small smile playing on my lips. "Let's just say I have a few surprises of my own. Now, how about we go make that graduation ceremony?" As we drove away from the house that had been our prison for so long, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. But with Emily by my side, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun was just peeking over the horizon as we hit the highway, painting the sky in hues of hope. It was a new day in more ways than one, and we were finally, truly, on our way to a better life. The key turned in the lock of our new apartment, and as the door swung open, I felt a rush of emotions, relief, excitement, and a lingering fear that this was all too good to be true. Emily stepped in behind me, her eyes wide as she took in our new home. "We did it, Mom," she whispered, a smile breaking across her face. I pulled her into a tight hug, feeling the tension of the past few days finally start to ebb away. "We sure did, sweetheart." As we began to unpack our meager belongings, my phone buzzed incessantly. Daniel's name flashed on the screen, along with a barrage of increasingly angry text messages. I silenced the phone, pushing down the guilt and anxiety that threatened to surface. "Is that Dad?" Emily asked, her voice tight. I nodded, forcing a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about it. He'll calm down eventually." But as the day wore on, Daniel's messages became more frantic and threatening. By evening, my phone was ringing nonstop, and I could feel my resolve starting to crumble. "Maybe I should talk to him," I muttered, more to myself than to Emily. She grabbed my hand, her eyes fierce. "No, Mom. Remember why we left. Don't let him manipulate you." I squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her determination. "You're right. We're in this together." Just as we were settling in for our first night in our new home, a loud banging on the door made us both jump. Daniel's voice, slurred and angry, echoed through the apartment. "Evelyn, I know you're in there. Open this door right now." Emily's face drained of color. How did he find us? My mind raced. Had I been careless? Left a trail somehow? The banging intensified, and I could hear our neighbors starting to stir. "Emily, go to your room and lock the door," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Call the police." As she disappeared down the hall, I approached the door, my heart pounding. "Daniel, you need to leave. Now." "Not until you open this door and talk to me," he roared. "You can't just take my daughter and run." I leaned against the door, feeling it shake with each of his blows. "She's not just your daughter, Daniel, and we're not coming back. It's over." His voice dropped, taking on a pleading tone that made my stomach churn. "Evelyn, please, I'm sorry, I'll change, we can work this out." For a moment I hesitated. The familiar pull of his manipulations tugged at me, years of conditioning threatening to override my resolve. Then I heard Emily's voice, soft but firm, from behind me. "Mom, the police are on their way. Stay strong." Her words snapped me back to reality. I straightened up, my voice clear and unwavering. Daniel, I'm not opening this door. If you don't leave now, you'll be arrested. Is that what you want Emily to see? There was a long pause, broken only by the sound of approaching sirens. Then, with a final defeated thud against the door, I heard Daniel's footsteps retreating. As the police arrived, taking statements and ensuring our safety, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. We had faced our final test and come out stronger. Later that night, as Emily slept peacefully in her new room, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Daniel. I'm sorry. I'll sign the papers. Just take care of her. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized the magnitude of what we'd accomplished. We had broken free, faced our fears, and come out the other side. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we had each other, and that was enough. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We had weathered the storm, and now, finally, we could begin to rebuild our lives on our own terms. The future was ours to shape, and for the first time in years, I was excited to see what it would bring. The day I served Daniel with divorce papers was the day I truly reclaimed my life. My hands shook as I watched him read through the documents, his face cycling through shock, anger, and finally defeat. Alimony? He sputtered, looking up at me with disbelief. After everything I've done for you and Emily? I stood my ground, channeling all the strength I'd built over the past months. Everything you've done? You mean the neglect, the lies, the infidelity? Yes, Daniel. Alimony, for the emotional turmoil you've put us through. He slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. You're really going through with this, aren't you? I am, I said firmly. It's time we both moved on. As I turned to leave, Daniel's voice stopped me. Evelyn, I'm sorry. For everything. I paused at the door, not turning back. I know, Daniel, but sometimes sorry isn't enough. Walking out of that office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Back at our new apartment, Emily was waiting, her face a mix of anxiety and hope. How did it go? I pulled her into a hug. It's done, sweetheart. We're starting our new life on our own terms. Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm proud of you, Mom. We did it. As we settled into our new routine, challenges arose. There were tight budgets to navigate, a new job for me to adjust to, and Emily's transition to college life. But through it all, our bond grew stronger. One evening, as we sat on our small balcony watching the sunset, Emily turned to me with a serious expression. Mom, I need to tell you something. My heart skipped a beat. What is it, honey? She took a deep breath. I've been thinking about changing my major. I know we talked about business, but I want to study social work. I want to help other families like you helped us. Tears pricked my eyes as I pulled her close. Oh, Emily, I'm so proud of you. You follow your heart, always. As the weeks turned into months, our new life took shape. I threw myself into my work, finding a sense of purpose I'd long forgotten. Emily thrived in her studies, her passion for helping others growing with each passing day. Daniel, true to his word, signed the divorce papers without contest. The alimony payments helped ease our financial burden, allowing us to focus on healing and growth. 1 year to the day after we left our old life behind, Emily and I stood in our living room, surrounded by friends from work and school. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, a far cry from the tense silences of our past. As I looked around at the life we'd built, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude. We had faced our fears, overcome obstacles, and emerged stronger than ever. Emily appeared at my side, linking her arm through mine. Penny for your thoughts, Mom? I smiled, squeezing her hand. Just thinking about how far we've come, how strong we are together. She nodded, her eyes shining. We make a pretty good team, don't we? The best, I agreed. As the party continued around us, I realized that this moment of joy, of peace, of true connection, was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not just for Emily, but for myself too. We had rewritten our story, transforming pain into strength, fear into courage. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Our journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now we were writing our own story, on our own terms, and that made all the difference. As the night wound down and our guests departed, Emily and I stood at the window, watching the city lights twinkle below. She leaned her head on my shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "You know, Mom," she said softly, "I used to think happily ever afters were just for fairy tales, but now I think maybe we've found ours." I wrapped my arm around her, my heart full. "You're right, sweetheart, this is our happily ever after, and we've earned every bit of it." As we stood there, bathed in the soft glow of our new life, I knew that we had not just survived, we had triumphed, and our story, our real story, was only just beginning.